Welcome to the deep dive. Today, um, today we're going deep on something crucial for anyone who's interested in international relations, especially if you're getting ready for the UPSC exam. We're diving into the complex relationship between gender, security, and armed conflict.
Yeah.
We hear about these things in the news all the time, but this deep dive is about going deeper, going beyond just the headlines. We'll uncover how feminist perspectives challenge traditional ideas about security and expose the hidden impact conflict has on women. And we'll reveal the deep links between war and masculinity.
Absolutely.
Get ready to see things in a new light because this deep dive will equip you with a nuanced understanding of these issues, and that knowledge, well, it's not just valuable for exams, it's valuable for understanding the world all around us.
Right.
So let's unpack this idea of security. When you hear that word, what comes to mind? I bet you think about national defense, right? Armies, weapons, protecting borders.
That's the traditional view, for sure. Focusing on state security and seeing threats as mainly coming from other countries. It's all about military strength and deterrence. Classic.
The readings you sent over make a really compelling argument, though. They argue this view is way too narrow. Feminist scholars actually call this the security paradox, right?
Exactly. They say that by focusing on state security, which often has a very masculine emphasis on power and conflict, you can actually create more insecurity.
So focusing on military might can actually make us less safe. That's a pretty wild idea.
Well, think about the arms race during the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union kept building more and more weapons to deter each other, but all they did was increase tensions and the risk of a terrible conflict. So by trying to be more secure, they actually made the world more dangerous.
That's a great example. It really highlights how counterintuitive this all is.
Yeah.
So what's the alternative? How do feminist scholars want us to redefine security?
They advocate for a broader idea called human security. It's not just about the absence of war, it's about freedom from all kinds of threats.
So it's not just about protecting borders, it's about protecting people from all kinds of harm.
Exactly. Things like freedom from poverty, inequality, and even violence within families and communities.
And for those of you prepping for the UPSC exam, this concept of human security is one you'll want to really dig into. It challenges those traditional notions of security and gets at the heart of what it means to feel safe and secure.
For sure.
You know, one thing that's always fascinated me, and it's a little uncomfortable to think about, is the connection between war and masculinity.
Yeah.
Is there something inherently masculine about warfare? What do the experts have to say?
It's a tough question, but feminist scholars say that having so many men in political and military leadership positions perpetuates this view of conflict as inevitable, maybe even desirable.
So the people in charge, who are mostly men, are the ones more likely to see war as an option.
That's the argument. And it's not just about who's in charge, it's also how militaries are structured around the world. Traditional military training often emphasizes stereotypical masculine traits. Aggression, stoicism, suppressing emotions. They see that as what makes a good soldier.
It's like that old boys don't cry thing, but on a global scale,
Yeah.
and a dangerous one.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And then there's the protection myth. This is really the core of these gender dynamics.
Yes, the protection myth. The idea that men are the warriors shielding women and children from harm. But as we're seeing, this idea is misleading, maybe even harmful.
It reinforces the gender binary, portraying women as passive and vulnerable in times of conflict. And it legitimizes male dominance and the use of violence.
And that leads us to the ways women become victims of war. War is brutal. There's no way around that. But people often assume that men are the main victims because they're the ones fighting. How do feminist scholars challenge this?
Well, they point out that women and children are the majority of casualties in modern conflicts, especially in new wars, conflicts characterized by ethnic or religious violence and guerrilla tactics, where it's hard to tell who is a combatant and who's a civilian.
So in modern war, it's not just armies fighting each other on a battlefield.
Right. Civilians are often caught in the crossfire, and because women and children make up a larger portion of the civilian population, they suffer more casualties.
That's a really heavy thought. And it really shows why human security is so important. We need to see how war impacts women specifically. And we need to go beyond just the physical dangers, right?
Absolutely. We have to consider displacement, economic hardship, the breakdown of social structures. These all disproportionately affect women. And then, of course, there's the reality of sexual violence, which has become a weapon of war in itself.
It's a horrible thought, but one we can't ignore. Rape as a weapon of war is a reality in conflicts across the globe.
It's used to terrorize, humiliate, and control populations. We've seen this in conflicts from Bosnia to Rwanda to the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's truly devastating.
And it's another reason understanding the gender dimensions of conflict is so important. We need to see the full picture, not just the traditional story.
Right.
Now, there's another disturbing aspect I want to talk about. It's the link between military bases and prostitution. It's a historical pattern that still happens today, and it has serious implications for women's safety. Can you talk about this connection?
It's often ignored or downplayed, but this phenomenon shows how women's bodies are commodified and exploited in war and militarization. And what's really striking is how it can get mixed up with international
So
politics.
it's not just a moral issue, it's political too.
Exactly. Some people argue that tolerance of these practices around U.S. bases in certain countries helps maintain strategic alliances. It's a really disturbing idea, trading women's security for national security.
That's a deeply unsettling thought. It highlights just how deep these power dynamics run. We've covered a lot. Let's pause and think about all of this.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. Yeah, it really makes you think about the price some groups pay, especially women, for this idea of national security.
And it reminds us that this discussion isn't just about victimization. Feminist perspectives have really changed how we see women's roles in conflict and peace building. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a crucial point. Feminist scholars have highlighted how resilient and how much agency women have in conflict zones. They've shown us that women are not just passive victims, they're actively working for peace, security, and justice in their communities.
So it's not about waiting to be rescued. It's about women taking control, shaping their own destinies.
Right? Their contributions are really diverse. They're often leading peace-building efforts, working on conflict resolution, and providing humanitarian aid.
They're the ones on the ground, seeing the devastation firsthand. It makes sense that they'd have a unique perspective on how to achieve lasting peace.
Absolutely. They understand the community dynamics, they have these lived experiences, and that's so valuable when you're trying to rebuild and foster reconciliation.
It sounds like we need their voices to create a more just and equal world. But sadly, those voices are often ignored in the big peace negotiations and decision-making. How can we change that?
That's a really important question. When you exclude women from these spaces, you just reinforce the power imbalances that cause conflict and insecurity. It's a vicious cycle.
So how do we break the cycle? How do we make sure women's voices are heard in international relations and security?
We need a shift in our thinking. We need to move away from the traditional male-dominated power structures and create something more inclusive and equitable.
So we need more women in leadership roles, more women as diplomats, negotiators, making policy, keeping the peace.
Exactly. We need to see women leading at every level, from the local community all the way up to the international organizations. It's not just about adding women to the mix, though. It's about changing the whole system.
This makes me think about UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. That was back in 2000. That was a big deal, wasn't it?
It was. It was a huge step toward recognizing how conflict disproportionately affects women and how vital their role is in peace building. It set the stage for a lot of initiatives and frameworks aimed at protecting women's rights in conflict zones.
But as with so many things, putting those ideas into practice is a whole other challenge.
It takes real commitment from governments, international organizations, and civil society. And it means constantly questioning our own biases and working to dismantle the power structures that cause inequality and injustice.
It sounds like a long road ahead, but one we need to travel. This idea of learning, unlearning, and reimagining, it keeps coming up, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And it's not just for academics or policymakers. This deep dive is for anyone who wants to understand the world. And for those UPSC folks out there, this is gold.
It's about giving ourselves the knowledge and critical thinking skills to challenge the status quo and work towards a future that's fair for everyone. It's about seeing how everything's connected and how our choices can affect the world around us. We all have a part to play.
We do. We all have a part in making sure peace and security aren't just words, but reality for everyone. And that starts with understanding these complex ideas, including the role gender plays.
We need to ditch those oversimplified stories and see all the ways war and conflict affect people and societies. And we need to question the assumptions and power structures that keep violence and inequality alive.
Exactly. We need to embrace a way of thinking about security that's inclusive and intersectional, that values everyone, and that strives for a future where peace means more than just the absence of war. It means justice and well-being for all.
That's a great way to put it. This deep dive has given me a lot to think about, and I hope it's been the same for you. Understanding these gender dimensions of security and conflict is essential if we want to make sense of the world today.
It's key for being an informed and engaged citizen, especially in a world that's increasingly connected like ours. We need to understand that peace and security aren't just the responsibility of governments.
They're goals we all need to work toward, and that starts with understanding gender, security, and armed conflict and how they're all intertwined.
So, if this deep dive has raised questions for you or you want to learn more, I encourage you to keep digging. For our listeners preparing for the UPSC exam, this episode has laid the groundwork for understanding these complex themes.
UPSC is looking for candidates who think critically, analyze things from different angles, and can apply knowledge to real-world situations. You're bound to get questions about this on the exam, so make sure you really understand these concepts.
That's right. This episode has given you the key concepts, frameworks, and real-world examples to help you ace your exam prep. Just make sure you go deeper into the readings, look at case studies, and practice explaining these arguments.
And for everyone listening, whether you're a student, a professional, or just curious about the world, we hope this deep dive has challenged you to think differently and broadened your understanding of how gender, security, and conflict are all connected. Remember, knowledge is power, and when you understand the causes of injustice, you're in a better position to create positive change.
And if this episode resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more in-depth looks at fascinating topics. As always, keep those questions coming. We love hearing from you.
You can find a ton of resources online, in books, or through all sorts of organizations that are working on these issues. And remember, your understanding of the world just gets richer when you consider different viewpoints and engage with diverse voices.
You've got to keep challenging our own assumptions and pushing for a world that's more just and equitable. Maybe someday we'll live in a world where we don't need episodes like this because gender equality and human security are just part of how we live.
That's a future worth fighting for. On that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive. I hope this exploration has been as insightful for you as it has been for me. Understanding how gender, security, and armed conflict all work together is not just some academic thing. It's key to building a more peaceful and just world.
If you're studying for the UPSC exam, dig deeper into those readings and look for real-world examples. This topic will definitely pop up, and if you can show a deep understanding of these issues, you'll stand out.
And for everyone else, keep learning about this stuff. Explore the resources we talked about, have those tough conversations, and challenge those old-fashioned ideas about gender insecurity.
Remember, change starts with awareness.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, giving you the knowledge and insights to see the world in a new way. So if you like this episode, hit that like button, subscribe, and share with your friends. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.